All right, what's going on, good people? Keeping it in mind as we continue to flow through the chapter, person perception. One of the things we talked about again in perceiving people is how much, as human beings, we communicate non-verbally, and how much of how other people perceive us can be based upon this. When we talk about nonverbal behavior, the literal definition is just a silent language that helps us identify a person's inner states. Where again, we talk about a poker face. Um, can you, again, when you're playing poker, and I'm not a poker player per se, but can you tell that I have like a potential winning hand where I'm really happy and excited, and it's showing in my face, or do I show that like, oh man, this is an awful hand. Oh my god, so other people are reading this, and that gives them a sense of how they should play their own hand. We see this in many aspects of society as well, through our body language, our eye contact, our physical touches can communicate certain things. And different cultures have different ways that this nonverbal language, different interpretations of these nonverbal cues. But in this way, again, the face is very telling. Freud, who we talked about earlier in terms of his role in informing our understanding of the subconscious, where again, there are so many things that affect us that we're not actively thinking about. They're in the back of our minds. And this way, Freud says that no mortal can keep a secret. If his or her lips are silent, she chatters with her fingertips. Betrayal oozes out of her at every pore. So this is saying that, again, even when somebody is lying or has a secret, their body language oftentimes, gives them away. But when we talk about the body, not every body part speaks as loudly as others. The face, again, is which, we talked about in the beginning, that's what gets most attention, obviously, in human conversations and interactions. It's, but you have to be mindful about reading people's faces too much, because for people that are deceptive, the face is easy to control. Again, I pride myself on having a pretty good poker face. There are times where I just let it ride. But there will be times where I'll be upset or happy, and it may not necessarily come across in my face. Other body parts, and again, you want to be mindful about this when you're having conversations with other people that might be deceiving you. And also in terms of yourself, that even though you may be able to control your face, other things like maybe your hand is really fidgety. So if you're nervous and your hand is shivering, shaking, like that's a little bit hard to control. Like, so even if you want to, still going to be some level of that. So again, people may say, hey, I'm not nervous at all. But what is your body doing? You have, again, just some like, fidget, or like, they call them tails, where, you may do something with your head or something. Again, we talked about, Jakira last time, that who has the most data on her, that would be her mother, more than likely. So in this regard, like, your mama will know, like, again, that even when you are telling them something, that your body language and your mother, having seen so many times, will immediately know if something might be a little bit off. Doesn't have to always be with deception that, you may come to the house and you tell, what's wrong, Rom? Ain't nothing wrong. But again, she can read your body language and know that. The danger is that sometimes people that don't know you as well as their mother may also try and read your body language. But keep in mind, right, that a lot of times, like when we talk about, trying to distinguish between truth and deception, look at the different charts and illustrations within the textbook that kind of highlight this for you throughout. And it talks about how, what this describes, again, that there are people whose jobs it is to try and determine whether or not, again, you're telling the truth. This is obviously true of U.S. Secret Service agents, police officers, and the like. Asking people, hey, where did you place this bomb? Who else was working with you? Obviously, they know that most people are not going to be honest with them in these situations, so they have to read other things. But most of us are very poor, even professionals, in being able to read truth and deception. This data here, again, with everything we talked about in this class, we try and use empirical data that speaks to the ability of certain professionals to be able to look at videos to determine who's lying and who's telling the truth. College students were just slightly behind police investigators who are supposed to do this for a living. There are many reasons for this, why we have difficulty detecting deception. I'll leave this up for a moment, allow you all to catch up, and then I'll explain these components in a little bit more detail. As always, make sure that you see how the things we're talking about here today connect back to previous topics in this chapter and in previous chapters. So one of the reasons why human beings are so poor at being able to really detect deception is that the signals that we're looking for in other people are often like, mismatched with the signals that, people really use to communicate, whether they're being truthful or not. And one of the first things that we make a mistake in doing, and hear me out here, make sure you're listening while you're taking these notes, is that we, as human beings, we give a lot of attention to words. I have been reading Dr. Muhammad. Of course I have. I read every day. Maybe that's true. In my experience, again, I'm a lot older than you all are. Words can really be trusted. This don't mean that people are always intentionally trying to lie to you. Keep in mind, we talked about in the earlier chapters that a lot of us are trying to do what? Impression management, where we're trying to manage how people perceive us. So we don't want, I was talking to a student earlier talking about they don't want to disappoint me, which like, who cares if you disappoint me? Like, that's not what this is about. Like, that ain't something I was focused on when I was a student, man. Like, that blows my mind, quite frankly. My teachers were disappointed. They just disappointed, dog. I'm doing this for me. So I'm not, so again, and we don't want to only use, myself as an example by any means. Because again, like I'm a human being. I have communicated some words that couldn't be trusted before. Absolutely. I would like to believe that's at a minimum. But sometimes, again, I may have said something, that I thought was truthful and was not. Other times, again, much like an example I gave, that yes, I will be concerned about how others may perceive me. So as we talk about it, when we're talking about introspection, a textbook term from the earlier sections, you want to ideally, again, have your words and actions add up as much as possible. But as we talked about, the person that you are is not what you say, but what you do. So in this way, other things oftentimes can be more telling. Again, words, got to take those with a grain of salt. That people oftentimes are going to say the things that are going to make them appear most favorable in a given situation. The face and the body, again, people that are pathological liars, they have a greater ability to control those. The most revealing cue oftentimes is the voice. Ask your boyfriend, what was you at last night? I was, the voice get a little lower, get a little high pitched, start talking a little faster when you lying and stuff, so those kind of things. And again, keep in mind, these are not opinions. This has been heavily researched. There are studies throughout this textbook that kind of illustrate this for you all. So typical behavior cues are not very telling. You have to be very mindful about this stuff, again, particularly amongst people that have, quite frankly, mastered dishonesty. But a lot of this has been focused on dispositions that, in reading a person's face, are they happy or sad? And each of us, as we talked about before with aggression, that just because Latavia may have had a bout of aggression, that does not necessarily make her an aggressive person. So the list that I asked you all to do a couple classes back, this might have even been last class, but when I asked you all to complete that list of kind of describing, listing some self-described traits, my sense is that most of those traits are things that are stable. That obviously you may have times where you're more energetic or less. There may be times where you don't have as much of a sense of humor as others. But in general, I can say that I'm a person that has a good sense of humor. I'm a hard worker, not a hard worker just when I'm getting paid, not a hard worker just for school. I'm a hard worker. That's stable in almost any situation. I'm very outspoken. And almost every these again are things that are stable, that have been true since I was, a little tyke. So we're talking about stable characteristics. There have been moments where I've gotten really angry and aggressive, but overall I would not, again, I'm not trying to fight and beat people up all the time or things like that, or get into people's personal space. I'm a human being, so I definitely have had some lazy moments and stuff. So what we're looking at is your stable characteristics. These stable characteristics that speak to your overall disposition and personality are used to predict future behaviors. We talked about earlier again, and make sure you see how these things are tying together. A testable term. Effective forecasting. That in understanding yourself, it helps you get a sense of how you're going to behave in all types of situations. If you know that you're normally a mild-mannered type person, then you know that if if when you're married, if there's some strife or periods of unease, which there definitely will be in any marriage, you probably have a sense of how you may respond to that. Conversely, aspects of your personality that if your husband were to put his hands on you or something like that, based upon your stable personality, how you're likely to respond to that kind of situation. Again, by me knowing that my stable personality is one of impatience, it helps me to know that hey, if you leave at a certain time, when rush hour is starting, you can already predict, Dr. Muhammad, how you're going to react in that situation. In this way, people begin to treat us in certain ways and make certain attributions about us based upon not mainly what we say, but mainly what we do. But since again, we talked about before, those four, those channels of communication, words are what we're most exposed to. So we want to be very mindful about the words that we put into the universe. The things that you say is in line with an expectation of what you're going to do. What we try and do with attribution theories is describe how people explain the causes of their behavior. Very important, the cause of their behavior. I was aggressive. I was generous. I'm hardworking. I'm prejudiced. I'm not, but say. We don't believe in the sciences, in the social sciences, that these behaviors just come out of thin air. They happen for no reason. That there's some cause and effect at work here. So when we try and explain behavior, that if we look at like why is Michael so adventurous? If he likes bungee jumping and skydiving and things like that, how did he get this type of behavior and personality? That when we look at people's personalities and dispositions, they can be grouped into two categories. Personal attributions, meaning that this is just who he is. This is in line with his personality in all situations. Or situational attributions, that there may be some situations where Michael is very adventurous. There may be other situations where he's less so. So maybe when it comes to outdoor stuff, he may be really adventurous and risque. When it comes to his financial matters, he may be more conservative, where he's not as willing to make untested investments and things of that nature. So the situation may determine his personality. Hear me out here. Again, make sure you're listening while you're taking notes here, because these are very important concepts. As always, theory tries to explain the cause and effect in social sciences. So there are a lot of theories about, how we attribute our behavior. The first that we're going to explore here is Jones's corresponding inference theory. So again, right, what we're trying to explain here, that if Jakira was, coming to class the first day, and I'm like, hey, everybody put your cell phones away, and Jakira yells at me like, why are you messing with me? Snaps off and I ain't put my phone away. That might be my first impression of her. Perhaps I might feel like, okay, that this is a really rude person. But that might be, again, we want to be careful with that, because that may not necessarily be the case. So we're talking about this like in her rudeness, that yes, it can absolutely be true that I observed some rude behavior. That can be factually true. What we want to try and look at is why that behavior occurs. So that's what we're trying to do with these theories. That is this rude behavior occurring because she is an enduring rude person? That's how she is all the time? Or is it something else? But when we engage people, when people engage us, they try and infer, they try and interpret, make conclusions about a certain behavior. Is this an enduring personal characteristic? So it's, again, is Shakira just normally a rude person in every situation with her friends, with her family, at work? Again, there are parts of our personalities, again, no matter that I know I'm very, I've been told on occasion that as an instructor, I can be kind of sarcastic, maybe once or twice. I'm sarcastic in every aspect of my life. Like, it's not just here. You should hear some of the comments my girlfriend be having to endure. Family, So there are parts of my personality, again, that are just always, very consistent. Other aspects might only be in place in a work environment. And again, when we're in class, I'm going to be very serious, structured, and buttoned up. During office hours, my personality is a little bit different. And if you catch me after hours, it'll be even more different. But when we look at other people's behavior, again, we're talking about person perception here, we make these inferences based upon three factors: their degree of choice, the effectiveness of their behavior, and the intended consequence of their behavior. Again, what did they mean to do? So that in playing basketball, if I reach out to boom and I hit you, you're going to be upset about me hitting you. But the intended consequences matter and will tell you something about my personality. So if I'm like, hey, my bad, if I'm immediately I reach out, that happens sometimes, physical game, and I'm like, hey, my bad, I'm gonna kill you straight. He has a different perception of me based upon my intended consequences. If I don't say anything, he can draw a conclusion like, okay, he did that shit on purpose, and that he just might be a dirty player. Expectedness of the behavior. Was the game as such where we were playing physical, where I felt like this was probably going to come? And what other choices and options did they have? And how was the environment impacting their choices? Let's look at a little bit more. Kelly's covariation theory tries to look at the stimulus that caused the behavior. Again, maybe Jakira is rude all the time. But more than likely, we want to look at what variable may have impacted her rude behavior. So maybe if everybody is acting rude in that way, if all the students respond in that way, I may have to look at okay, maybe it's not just Jakira. Maybe I have done something to cause all the students to be rude. Maybe the next two classes, Jakira was very nice. So again, what we want to look at in terms of trying to assess other people's behavior is what is the cause. So covariation principle, again, where within there you kind of hear variables. That there are certain variables that may impact our behavior for that particular situation. If it's a really hot, muggy day, you may be a little bit more irritated than normal. Does that mean that you're always that irritated? No. The situational variable impacted your behavior. When we get a little bit hungry, all of us get a little bit grumpier. Does that mean that you're a grumpy person all the time? Maybe. But more than likely, it's probably that situational variable that stimulated this behavior. So what we want to look at here again is, who is this person consistently? If Jakira is grumpy and rude every day, then okay, then that may be, again, just part of her enduring personality. But too often, we ignore the stimuli. Again, I see this all the time where, I'll be nice and joking, mini classes. I'll be like, hey, I expect y'all to read next time. Come in ready to discuss. I come in and ain't nobody read, and then I blow my mind. Not literally, of course. What was the stimulus there that caused the behavior? Am I just, a wild, flying off the cuff, person all the time? I don't think so, but maybe I am. But what often gets ignored is what stimulates that behavior. That I may have entered this class in a certain mindset, and then something stimulates to change my behavior. Rather than perceiving me as like a certain person all the time, it might behoove folks to look at the variable that caused that behavior. The same way we know within ourselves that, hey, I was really snappy with my girlfriend because, I was a little bit stressed at work, because, I was upset about, how that Cowboy game ended. This doesn't mean that, we give people a license to be rude and stuff. Again, in the example of Jakira being rude in class, we're going to have a conversation. But that could be very different than me, like, again, just saying, okay, that this is who Jakira is. And again, that any one of us have the potential to be rude given the situation. And this is important because in making assessments about and making perceptions about people, as I talked about with Jakira's mother has access to a lot more relevant information about her than I ever would. But we oftentimes make perceptions about other people based off of very small amounts of information. That during this 10-minute interaction during class time with Jakira, where she may have been rude, that I'm going to take these 10 minutes of her life to perceive of who she is completely as a person. We do this all the time. Again, we talk about racism and things like that later in the chapter, later in the textbook, that people may have a certain perception about Blacks and Hispanics off of very limited information. That ain't even just an individual. You're making a perception sometimes about a whole group of people off of very limited data. This doesn't mean that people are always acting badly or malicious. Again, like as human beings, we're processing a lot of information all the time. So we take shortcuts to size up and make assessments about other people, not just because we're short-sighted and sometimes lazy in our thinking, although we can be, but just because, again, there's such a need for speed in our modern society and to figure and process things very quickly. But when perceiving other people, we don't often give a lot of thought to like the attributions. What explains? If they're behaving a certain way, what do we attribute this to? If they're behaving a certain way, what do we attribute this to? Do we attribute to the fact that they're a nasty person? Do we attribute to the fact that they were raised a certain way? Do we attribute to like the fact that that there's some situational variable in this moment making them behave this way? Because we don't have the ability to, again, look at all the data that informs their personalities with most people. Our family members and things like that, we probably do. So we use a lot of what are called cognitive heuristics. Well, we kind of cognitive, we very quickly categorize people and their behaviors in our brain in a way that makes sense of it. That we've seen people that are, again, so, okay, that this person, I saw a person that was really rude one time because they weren't having enough sex. So if I see this person being rude, it's because of that. Maybe that's true. More than likely, it's not. A cognitive heuristic, it can be quick and easy. Again, let me size and explain this behavior away. But it can often lead to error. So we want to look at, again, is availability heuristics. That if I am making a assessment about Jakira's behavior, I want to look at it again, with how many instances has this behavior occurred? Was it just one day? Was it just many days? A lot of times what we do with each other, we have like a false consensus where we may see a certain behavior occur and we ignore all types of other behaviors. Again, she may have come in nice 20 times after that, but it's almost like I'm invisible to that now and I only see this first time. We got to be mindful about this as human beings, because even though that would be a short-sighted way of me assessing Jakira, and I only use Jakira, in this example because she's not rude, but we've had our moments. But by me being able to see who she is consistently, that allows us to deal in a very different way. I'm sure I piss her off many times, but I'm happy that, I feel like she sees me in totality and not just in those lesser moments that we all have. But we also got to be mindful that, Again, Jakir and I have had a lot of times to like see each other in a lot of different experience, time with each other in different academic settings that allow us to see each other a lot more fully. But we may not always get that opportunity with everyone. So even though, again, we want to be mindful about, our consistent behavior so that false consensus don't apply, that outweigh who we are consistently, then we also have to be mindful of the fact that first impressions can form very quickly and they can stick. So the impressions that you want to create the 20th time you meet a person, I would encourage you to have those things in place the first time, because you may never get a chance to make another impression. We'll close with counterfactual thinking. And this is related, like in many ways, to our own personal perceptions, in terms of trying to attribute our own behavior. That a lot of time, particularly in looking back, when you get my age and you look back upon your life, and again, remember what we talked about last week, the actual self and the ideal self, the actual self and the ideal self. That to keep a psychological balance in that regard, we oftentimes would use counterfactual thinking, where we imagine our past as either being better or worse than it really was. So we idealize our past in a way that kind of helps us deal with the present a little bit more. We see this in regards to our choices in education, our careers, and our romance. Next time, we're going to begin with fundamental attribution error. Again, when we talk about attribution, when we're trying to explain a person's behavior or personality, what do we attribute that to? Is this a stable part of who they are, or is just a certain situation that's motivating this behavior response? Please keep reading up. Again, we're going to be talking about this, chapter all through next week. It's a lot of material here to cover. It can be a lot to mix up and, get lost in. So take your time with this. If there's anything that you need clarity on, please reach out and schedule some office hour time with me. As always, this lecture is being recorded. I hope that you find it informative. If not, look at it again, and then let's schedule some office hour meetings to talk about it more fully. We'll be at our normal time on Tuesday.